Hey everyone, and welcome back. So today we're going to be reviewing Firegirl Hack and Splash Rescue DX on the Nintendo Switch. Now this game is a 2D action roguelite with an overall firefighter theme. It was released on June 22nd of 2022, and it currently sells on the Nintendo Switch eShop for $17.99. The game was published by Thunderful, and it has a download size of 552 megabytes. So now, is this a hot new roguelite on the Nintendo Switch, or unfortunately, has its fire already been extinguished? Well, we're going to try and figure that out in today's review. Now remember, if you are liking the content, one of the best ways to help support the channel, just hit that like button. Now if we start with the storyline. In this game, you're playing as Firegirl, a brand new recruit to the fire brigade. You're also the daughter of a deceased firefighter who lost his life in a battle against the Fire Lord. Now, just as you're getting on the job, the city is assailed by fire monsters. So it's now your job as the brand new recruit to save the people, put out the fire, and solve the mystery behind the Fire Lord. Now, the storyline here is going to be delivered every few missions when you hit a certain checkpoint, and you're going to get a little bit more information about the mysterious events that are hitting the city and the corruption that is all intertwined with it. Oddly enough, the overarching storyline sort of reminded me of a supernatural version of the old movie Backdraft. Now the storyline could be delivered better, but ultimately it does help and serve its purpose in having you want to come back to at least figure out what the mystery is all about. Now if we move on to the gameplay. The game really does play out as an action platformer, having you alternate between your axe to knock down doors and obstacles, and your fire hose to extinguish fires. Your fire hose also does have a secondary purpose, using it as propulsion for your jumps. Now this being a roguelite, the game will drop you in procedurally generated environments, such as burning buildings or trains that are caught on fire. And your main task is to find a certain number of trapped citizens or pets, and then make your way out of the building, or in the case of the train, to stop the out-of-the-control train. Now blocking your way, you'll have different representations of fire, pretty much always taking on the shape of some form of monster. You also have a timer that's constantly counting down at the top of the screen. However, extinguishing any type of fire will add some time back. A second restriction that you have to deal with throughout the levels is that you do carry a certain limited quantity of water. Once your counter hits 0, you'll still be able to use your fire hose, however at a very reduced range and power. You also have to keep an eye on your health gauge because you can only take a certain number of hits before unfortunately you die and you automatically fail the mission. Now failing a mission is not the end of the world, you'll still receive a certain amount of compensation, however greatly reduced. And so far from what I've seen, you can't advance the storyline on a failed mission. As you progress through the game, the levels will get more and more difficult, asking you to save more people in one and only run. However, helping to compensate for that added difficulty is a variety of upgrades that you can buy in your firehouse. At first, you'll be limited to only a shop across the street to buy some extra armor and some upgrades to your basic water capabilities. However, as you go through the missions, you will be rescuing people who will want to become volunteers in the firehouse. If you do hire these volunteers, they will offer you additional upgrades to different areas of gameplay, such as the ability to heal yourself on a mission, or then again, the amount of money you get from a successful run. Also, as you reach certain milestones in the game, you'll unlock certain badges that you can then add to your uniform and basically boost your stats yet again. So there we have the general gameplay loop. Go on a mission, save some people from a burning building, get some money, upgrade your gear, go back on another mission. Now at its heart, this sounds like it could be a pretty successful gameplay loop. However, unfortunately, here comes a couple of issues. First of all, there's unfortunately not a huge variety to the types of environments you'll be going through. Therefore, only after about a dozen runs, I already started finding it somewhat repetitive. Secondly, the generation of the environments themselves seems very uneven, leading to a lot of cheap deaths where in some situations they force you to do blind jumps into basically burning areas. Or then again, you might die to some fire that's hidden in an area obstructed from the camera's view. Also, I found little ability to personalize your style of gameplay as is expected in a lot of roguelites. Basically, all the upgrades are done in a linear fashion. It's the same upgrade getting better and better and better. The only one offering a little bit of variety are the option to choose different badges. However, it really didn't affect the gameplay all that much. And lastly, and probably the most glaring issue, is that the gameplay mechanics themselves seem a very odd fit for a roguelite game, pulling you in two opposite directions. The timer wants you to go fast through the buildings. However, a lot of the traps and elements really want you to take a more cautious approach. However, if you take that cautious approach, you then run out of time. Now, you could make the argument that the game wants you to balance these two aspects, but the problem is you don't get a layout of the environment before, so you have no idea if this is a level that you should be rushing through because it's extremely long, or this is a level that you should be taking a caution approach to because it's short yet packed with traps. And sometimes, unfortunately, you get unlucky and you get a long environment packed with traps. Overall, there's a part of me that feels this game would have been better as a standard action platformer with a set level design. Now let's move on to the controls. Now the basic controls behind the game is Y will swing your axe, B will allow you to jump, and hitting the ZR trigger will fire your hose. While you're firing your hose, you can use either one of the joysticks to aim your shot. Lastly, if you hit the ZR trigger while jumping, that will propel you using your hose for as long as you hold it down. And that breaks down the basic controls. However, if we get to the feeling, and that's another area where I feel that this game is just mismatched. Basically, the controls feel like they have an intentional sluggishness behind them. Whether it be swinging your axe, jumping, changing directions, there's always a half-second delay before your character actually reacts. However, some of the obstacles you come across, especially the fire cannons that sort of fire projectiles at you, require split-second reactions. Which is why I mentioned earlier that if you don't take a cautious approach and see that the cannon is there beforehand, there is no way you're reacting to it. Once again, just as in the general gameplay section, this control mismatch just leads to a ton of frustration. Now, it isn't the end of the world, and after a while I was able to adapt and get all this to mesh together. However, it always feels like you're fighting against a certain aspect of the design of the game. And overall, that really just greatly diminished my experience with Firegirl. Now if we move on to the graphics and sound. Now the graphical presentation of this game is probably one of its best aspects. Now it uses a 2.D aspect point that really pushes the limits, where at some points you really feel like there's a third dimension behind you. And the basic pixel art package, plus the great use of colors throughout the environment, does offer a very pleasing experience. However, yet again there's a couple of issues. I did find the design behind the enemy characters once again to somewhat become repetitive, using the same design but adding a level of toughness without any real visual difference. Also, there were unfortunately a couple of frame rate issues. Now they weren't widespread and they didn't affect my general overall gameplay. However, there were a few occasions where I came across stuttering. Now for the sound design package, the basic track loop used for the game is actually a pretty interesting one. However, once again, the only issue, it's fairly short and it does once again become quite repetitive, especially for a game that you're really going to have to do multiple runs of. Now there is a little bit of variety. I think I identified 3 different tracks throughout my playthrough. However, all of them, as I said earlier, were on very short loops. If you're going through a level that only lasts a minute, it's not going to be too much of an issue. But once you get to a level that you might spend 4 or 5 minutes in, it unfortunately becomes, once again, quite repetitive. Now, just before we move on to the verdict, I do want to give a quick synthesis to put everything into context. Now, although this game has many issues, I did overall have a certain amount of fun with it. However, it has a very grindy beginning to it, and I would say that fun unlocked after about 2 or 3 hours of gameplay, and you start getting a full set of abilities. Now, you might tell yourself that that type of experience is normal. However, the difference here is once you get to that point, you've already pretty much seen everything this game has to offer. So rather than the game opening up and getting a plethora of new experiences, it's just more of the same, and at that point you're pretty close to wanting to move on. Which is why, as I said earlier, I really do think this game would have done better as a fixed level action platformer with a really developed storyline behind it. You could have had something great here, rather than what winds up to be a really mediocre roguelike. Now if we move on to the verdict, and if this is one of the first reviews of mine that you're watching, you can see my full review scale down below in the description of the video. And in the case of Firegirl on the Nintendo Switch, I'm going to be giving it a score of 5.5, which is playable. There is some fun to be had here with this game. It just unfortunately takes a lot of grindiness at the beginning, and ultimately the payoff just might not be worth it for some people out there. Also at a sale price of $17.99 when we compare it against some of the other roguelites available on the Nintendo Switch at similar prices, it really just doesn't have a very interesting package compared to those other competitors. On a side note, however, if you are really into the firefighter theme and this game goes on sale, I would say by at least 40% off, then it could be worth taking a look at. So now I throw the question back to you. Based on the review, will you be picking up Firegirl nonetheless? Or maybe have you picked it up already and do you disagree with the review? You can always leave that down below in the comments. Also, don't forget on the way out, if you did appreciate the content, consider hitting that like button, subscribing to the channel if you aren't already, and clicking on that notification bell so you know when all my future content comes out. And as usual, I hope I'll see you in my next video.